Hey, this is Chip from The Real Dirt, and on today's Dirt, we talked to Ted Corless of News Munchies. Now, Ted's a lawyer turned blogger, and News Munchies is mostly about cannabis-related news. Me and Ted kind of met virtually, and then he called me up, and we had some really good conversations about cannabis legalization in Florida and the fight that was going on. And, I decided, hey, you're coming up here for a family vacation. Why don't you stop in to the Real Dirt Studios and we'll have a chat about what's going on in the country and in Florida specifically. There's this perception that medical cannabis is legal throughout the country, and it is legal in many states. And if you look up a normal website, they'll tell you that, 32 states or 39 states have medical cannabis laws. And even though that may be true, when you dig deeper into that, you get states like Georgia and Florida and Texas that have really restrictive cannabis laws. But they claim to have made compassionate laws for their citizens and passed medical cannabis, medical marijuana, as they often refer to it. And it's just all smoke and mirrors. Often it's twofold. It's a politician, like in Georgia's case, politicians who want to seem compassionate because, there's a legitimate use for medical marijuana, medical cannabis. And they have, families that come to them and say, hey, why can't we use medical cannabis? Why can't we use CBD, for our child's illness, for my illness, for my grandparents' illness, for my parents' illness? And so the politicians, taking an opportunity, have created these laws that say, medical cannabis, we need to have medical cannabis. And they pass a law and it says, we have medical cannabis. But in reality, there's no way to get the medical cannabis. Nobody's growing the medical cannabis, whether it's CBD or THC, product. It's just really smoke and mirrors. And then also in many cases, places pass laws, the people want the laws to be passed and pass them, and then legislation and rulemaking just holds the will of the people up. California is a prime example of this right now. Now California's doing an incredible job with the speed that they have rolled out medical cannabis and cannabis, regulated adult use cannabis. They're having this in so many places. They're having a hard time switching from this cop enforcement mentality to this compliance, legally regulated mentality. Many people have continued to have altercations with law enforcement, including Fish and Wildlife throughout California. Not to mention the attitude and the confrontation they get from so many people as they try to register their cannabis farms and come out, of this private market, unregulated history and move into this next phase of cannabis for us. And, there's just so much resistance wherever you go. From people like just dragging their feet to process the laws, because there's just this resistance that cannabis and marijuana is just awful, that ganja is just going to ruin us all. And, I resent that because I am far from ruined. And I've been a cannabis enthusiast and, a business person my whole life, my whole adult life. I've pretty much supported myself through my own business endeavors and smoked tons of ganja along the way. I may be a stoner, but hey, man, that's my choice. And, just like the rest of you, the rest of our listeners, you've accomplished things in your life. You're not, just a useless, scourge on society. You're productive people. And, we're still fighting that fight. We still have that stigmatism of what cannabis is, what marijuana is, and who we are that consume it, use it, promote it, grow it, talk about it. we're still getting judged. Man, here at The Real Dirt, we're even getting judged by Facebook, Instagram, Google. We can't do any advertisements pretty much. If we do, they're like highly criticized. We basically can't advertise on, Facebook or Instagram. If you see any of our stuff on Facebook or Instagram, it's all organic traffic that we put out that people view. It's not propped up in any way because, Google won't let us use AdWords. Facebook and Instagram, they say that, hey, we're telling you how to grow weed. So, we're promoting weed smoking. We're promoting weed consumption. So we can't advertise. And they just make those laws up, man. They just make those like reasons up, and meanwhile, like, man, you can advertise all other kind and promote any other kind of culture, but you can't promote ganja culture. I mean, if you want to be the freakiest, deakiest motherfucker out there, you can promote your culture, right? But like we, as cannabis consumers, cannabis advocates, cannabis users, cannabis growers, we can't do that. We're still restricted within society. We are still restricted within business. We cannot bank with places. We can't have merchant services. And if we can, it's like we're getting vipered out with these, horrible interest rates, with horrible service. And, sometimes we just have to accept and be like, phew, man, I've heard people say exactly what I'm fixing to say to you. Man, I don't even care if I have to pay, $30,000 a year to, have a bank. I don't even care. And like, that's just fucking nuts, man, that you're going to have a business that's, even this particular business we're talking about, $10 million business, for them to be forced to pay $30,000 a year in bank fees is just ridiculous, solely because they're a cannabis business. And in my personal businesses, Cultivate Colorado, we've been discriminated against by all the banks. We've been discriminated against by many merchant services solely because we sell equipment that may be used for cannabis growing. Like, now, I don't know what you do with my equipment once you leave, right, my store. And yeah, I'm pretty sure most of my customers are growing legal-ish cannabis. Right. And even if they aren't, that's none of my business what they do with my product once I sell it to them. That's their product then, and we have this fundamental business practice in the U.S. called the right of the first sale. And man, if I sell something to you, you can go do whatever you want with it pretty much. Right. That is your product. You can go resell it if you want. Right. You can use it in ways that I didn't intend it for you if you want. Right. I might have my disclaimers, but like, that is your product and it's your own private life and your own private business. I don't care about that. And neither should the government and neither should the banks. Right. I'm a little fired up here. Of course, it's Sunday, Marley Sunday. We've been smoking weed and listening to Peter Tosh. And, Peter Tosh is a rebel. He was always fighting the system. And we got to keep fighting the system here. In places like Florida, and, hell, every place, California, Colorado, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, even though you have legal cannabis right now, legal adult use, maybe legal medical cannabis, you still have forces against you that are trying to take this back to the old days, that are going to fight as long as they can, right, to go back because they don't like it. They don't like it. It's like their personal opinion. Man, there's a lot of things I don't like about the world or people, but like, that's their own business, right? And so should the police officers and Fish and Game and the government officials, and the elected officials. They need to do the same thing. This is the will of the people, right? They need to just go with the flow. And hey, if they don't, it's our responsibility as voters to vote them out, to call them up and to speak out. And that's what I'm going to encourage you guys all to do. When you have an opportunity or make that opportunity to call up your local political representative, your state representative, your national representatives, call them up and say, hey, man, this is me, and this is what I'm interested in with cannabis. And I just want you to know that, I'm watching you, right? Or if, you happen to be in one of those counties where the people are absolutely against cannabis, like, Mendocino County in California, the local government there is actively just pushed back on cannabis regulation, every single step of the way. You got people like Ron Edwards over there and other people who are actively fighting, the government and pushing back so that the cannabis farmers there can actually have some sort of sustainable economy and be actually able to grow this plant that the voters of California and the voters of Mendocino County want to see happen. So I'm going to ask you to go and do that and just make your voice be heard, man. That's the beauty of this country, and that's the beauty of freedom, is you can make your voice be heard. And let's do it. Hey, let's also sit back, fire one up, download all the episodes of the Real Dirt podcast. If you have not subscribed on our iTunes account, please subscribe. If you want to listen to any episode, you can go to therealdirt.com and play any episode there. So smoke out, listen to this great episode with me and Ted Corless from News Munchies. Yeah, man, enjoy. Good evening. Once again, you have reached the Real Dirt. And on today's Dirt, I have Ted Corless of News Munchies. How's it going, Ted?
Outstanding. So very excited to be here, right here physically with you.
Yeah, man. Me and Ted started talking a couple months ago about coming onto the show, and he has this great interviewing process. I loved it. He has his entertainment lawyer call you up and vet you out a little bit,
Right.
Like, I want to make sure this is right venue for Ted. But hit it off with her, hit it off with you. We immediately had like tons of stuff to talk about. It was initially just going to be a phone conversation because Ted is in Tampa, Florida.
Right. And I really needed to get the hell out of... I left Tampa to come to Denver, and it was 94 degrees and about 78% humidity. And so it's so fantastic to be here anyway. So I'm going to spend this time with you here now, and then my family arrives, and we're going to spend about 10 days on the back of a horse.
Oh, that's
so it should
great.
Be a spectacular way.
Florida's a great place to be right now, though, huh?
Well,
right.
except if you're attempting to buy legal marijuana. It's a little tricky down there. It's something I'll figure we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we'll get in there. So let's get into it a little bit. And, mostly, I should say, I have been having cannabis growers on the show. But lately, I've had a couple of other industry people. And you're a lawyer by day, blogger by night.
That's right.
You want to explain that type of
Sure.
Superhero designation there?
Sure. Well, I sue insurance companies for my day job.
Yeah, Ted.
That's right.
All right. Everybody give it up to Ted. Yeah.
Right. When you say, why do you sue insurance companies? It's just like, well, why did you rob the bank? Because that's where the money is.
Right. And absolutely.
So, that's right. Well, I've been a practicing attorney now for 25 years, which sounds pretty crazy when I say it. But I have always found cannabis to be something from both a cultural, scientific perspective to fascinate me. And obviously, I've been a consumer of it since I was about 12 years old. Later on in life, it was something that showed up in college, and I spent a substantial amount of time in. And so about 5 years ago, I started a blog called News Munchies. So I have a blog called newsmunchies.com. I write a ton about the legal, cultural issues associated with it, and especially a slant on the political side as well.
When we spoke last week, I guess it was
before you went to Croatia.
Before I went to Croatia, right? It was like a month ago, right? A judge in Florida had just said that the medical cannabis laws were unconstitutional and that you could not ban people from smoking cannabis.
Right.
So that was
right.
That was big news, right? When we were speaking last, then came a potential appeal, and a couple of other things happened. What ended up detailing with that?
Well, what ended up happening was that the original bill that came after our amendment, we had Amendment 2, which passed overwhelmingly. To give you a sense of how big it was, there's 67 counties in the state of Florida, the third largest state in the United States. Of the 67 counties, when Amendment 2's results came out, 67 of the 67 had a majority or more vote to support medical marijuana. the number we needed in order to pass was 60%. And of the 67 counties, 64 of them met the 60% threshold. And I'm talking about extremely conservative counties right in the agricultural centers in the center of Florida were coming in the 65% range. Overwhelming support for it, because the Amendment 2 kicked the ability of the legislature to ultimately regulate medical marijuana, but gave it a constitutional standard. And so what's been going on since then, a whole bunch of legal battles over what you can smoke, how you can smoke it, and who gets to sell it as a dispensary owner. And so Florida ran into a problem because I had an opportunity to speak with Richard Corcoran, who is the Speaker of the House, and he told me without reservation, he goes, listen, you guys wanted medical marijuana, and that's what we gave you. You have things like nasal sprays, or you have pills, which I don't know what the hell is in those, and the worst vape pens you can ever imagine. You could literally smoke an entire vape pen and you wouldn't even get dizzy. And so Florida has been going through a process where there have been challenges to the law, because the one thing you cannot do legally in the state of Florida is to smoke it. You can vape it a little and you can take these other products, but there are no plants sold at all. And instead, we're essentially just concentrates. And so there's a judge in the first district who had found the ban on smoking to be unconstitutional because smoking was specifically identified in Amendment 2 as a private right. And when that happened, the question was ultimately, is the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, going to continue to appeal that verdict, or is he simply going to ask that they stand back and let the legislature clean up the bill? He decided to go ahead and appeal, and that's what's happening now.
I wish we really had a smoke expert on the show here. Let me see if I can. Wait, Ted, wait a second. Ted Corless, you're actually a smoke expert.
I am.
Now, this is one of the exciting parts about having Ted on our shows. He was involved in several tobacco lawsuits and had really understands the different qualities of smoke. So I'm looking forward to an education right now on what smoke really is for cannabis.
Here's the fun thing about smoke is that smoke is not smoke, meaning that
smoke's not smoke.
Right. My background is that I spent time as a litigator, a trial lawyer representing the tobacco industry. I don't want to mention this company specifically because I think they're probably more powerful than the federal government.
One of the largest companies in the world.
Right. Yeah. And so that very large company had me meeting with doctors who would testify on behalf of the tobacco industry that this cancer was not caused by those cigarettes. So my focus was on preparing these witnesses to testify on behalf of the industry, but also I would be responsible for attacking, in a figurative sense, the individuals who were representing smokers who were saying that they got cancer as a result of that. I traveled all over the United States. I was in 22 different states working with occupational medicine physicians. I traveled with a mycologist who, by the way, told me he grows the most amazing psilocybin cubensis mushrooms. He didn't mention that at the office too much, but we studied what is smoke and how does it hurt you. I then took that knowledge to cannabis. And the amazing thing is that what really makes tobacco smoke so bad for you are nitrosamines, tobacco-specific nitrosamines. Well, you get those into tobacco not because they're naturally occurring in the plants, but because they're introduced during the curing process.
So let's back this up right here. So What are nitrosamines?
Now, are you a tobacco smoker?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, tobacco has two bad things in it that really hurt you. If you take Marlboro Reds, for example, Marlboro Reds will have two things in there that will ultimately cause you disease. You have tobacco-specific nitrosamines, which are a preservative that are introduced during the curing process. And those are what give you cancer. You then have the second bad actor, which is what people would call tar. You have tar and nicotine. The tar is really coal tar pitch volatiles, or what we call CTPV. And CTPV is the stuff that gives you emphysema, causes spacing, gapping in your lungs and ultimately prevents you from clearing your lungs when you're breathing naturally. And so those are the two bad things in Marlboro Reds. Interestingly, most people want to smoke Marlboro Lights because they believe that the lights are better for you. But it turns out the lights are worse because it's simple math. If you decrease the amount of coal tar pitch volatiles, which is what lights do, you increase the amount of nitrosamines. Well, the nitrosamines are the things that give you cancer. And what they do is, see, when you inhale that smoke attacks you on a genetic level. There is a specific gene called the P53 gene. And that P53 gene is your defense to cancer. But tobacco attacks that and goes in and hits a specific codon on the gene, and it turns the P53 gene off, which means when you get a naturally occurring cancer that you got some renegade cell that's running around your body has a defense to that. But the tobacco smoke actually shuts down your ability to attack the disease in your own body. But see, none of that stuff exists in the context of cannabis smoke.
So when I'm smoking out of my bong and that chunky black tar stuff, that is not CTPV.
It is not.
So we call it tar?
Well, have you ever seen creosote? You know, the old days when they used to have telephone poles?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. If you got that stuff on your fingers, it's almost like a topical poison. Most cancer research started out with what they called mouse painting. They would take a mouse and shave it, and they would take coal tar pitch and they would paint it, or creosote, and they would paint it on the mice. And the locations where it made contact with the skin, the mice would develop tumors. Why did they start testing that way? The reason they tested that way is because chimney sweeps were one of the first occupational exposures to cancers that were ever studied, because these guys would go out and clean the chimney and they would get this creosote all over their fingers and they would step out to urinate. Well, they wouldn't wash their hands, so they were essentially painting their genitals with coal tar pitch. And then they realized, they did a cluster study because so many of these guys were showing up with testicular cancer. And they figured out it was because they were exposing themselves to that.
I never wanted to be a chimney sweep.
It's not...
never was drawn to that lifestyle.
You know? Yeah, no, I can't say that of all. I had some pretty crazy ideas. I think I wanted to be a trash man when I was about 8 years old, but that's as close to a goofy job I've ever had.
Well, you fell into something pretty interesting, that's for sure. So, okay, so
that's the science of smoke.
We're hot on it right now. Right, so now I got some questions.
Sure.
So, how can I talk to somebody to convince them that cannabis smoke, there's not a secondhand smoke, and it's not bad for you?
I will tell you that my perspective on any secondhand smoke is that most environmental tobacco smoke claims are bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
There's 3 different kinds of smoke that comes off of a cigarette. You have what is called mainstream smoke, when you put the cigarette in your mouth and draw it into your mouth. And then there's side stream smoke. Now, side stream smoke is smoke that was never inhaled. I'm going to give you some numbers to kind of compare.
So coming off the cigarette.
Exactly.
Understood.
If you got a 12-minute cigarette, which is about right, you put the cigarette in the ashtray. If it's filling the room with smoke, that's side stream smoke.
Okay.
And then you have environmental tobacco smoke, and that is smoke that you've inhaled and you've exhaled.
You filtered through your lungs and body.
You did, right? You are the ultimate filter of your own tobacco smoke. Now, here are the numbers. If there's a value of tar in the smoke, we would say that a mainstream smoke would have a value of 1. A side stream smoke would have a value of 0.1. Environmental tobacco smoke, secondhand smoke, has a value of 0.01. Because what happens when you exhale it is the smoke decays and it just breaks down. And then the reason it stinks so badly, and cannabis smoke doesn't do this, it's because it's electrically charged and that it's negatively charged. So you're positively charged. You're a positive guy. You know what I mean?
Totally
positive guy. And that's why the smoke kind of sticks to you, is because you're positive, it's negative, it's a date. And so that's tobacco smoke, environmental tobacco smoke in 40 seconds.
Is a secondhand high, is that reality?
I don't think they've actually. Oh, secondhand high. No, see that whole contact high thing. People who'd say that they don't want to go to a concert because they're worried they got a drug test coming up. Folks, that is completely
not real.
Not real. That's not real at all. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to our smoking definitions. I have my mainstream smoke, so I've just hit my joint.
Right.
Then I put it out in the ashtray, or I put it in the ashtray, and smoke is billowing it off. Right. You're saying that people don't get high off that smoke?
They do not.
All right.
Yeah. There's just
is
no
it just
way.
because the amount that is diluted in their atmosphere and how much they're breathing in?
It is. It's a process of dilution, and it's also a process of decay, because the smoke will break down. It has a half-life of a couple of seconds.
Okay.
And once the smoke is exhaled and it breaks down, it's still physically in the room, but it doesn't have all of that nasty stuff that's going to end your life.
This is something I've thought about for a long time, is because you've noticed people get, quote unquote, a contact high, but it's a social phenomenon and not actually a chemical phenomenon.
I think I know what you're saying. I think it's the idea of, I love it hanging out with people who are smoking. I mean, smoking cannabis. But the idea, though, is that it's still just kind of a social experience. It's nothing chemically or scientifically. It doesn't get in your body that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've been filling the room with cannabis smoke this the whole talk. So, if there's secondhand smoke, he would slow down. If secondhand stoned, he would slow down a little bit.
And we could quadruple. Well, or I could help you fill the room with more smoke.
There we go.
And but in the end of the day, if I don't take any mainstream cannabis smoke into my lungs, you're not going to have any THC or CBD. You're not going to find cannabinoids in your bloodstream.
Okay, so my proper argument would be, say Travis over here, he's our studio technician today and our social media guy. Travis can't handle his weed smoke so much at work. He's still a young Padawan. So if I'm smoking and the room's filling up with smoke, I get to say to Travis that, no, you're not stoned. You're not taking any mainstream cannabis smoke.
Right. That's right.
You're just acting. Get back to work.
Yeah. Or start smoking. Start smoking. If you want in, you got to get in on your own.
Yeah, no, I let all my employees smoke as much as they possibly can tolerate and still go to work.
I run a law firm, and I will say that I have a pretty liberal. We have a no drug testing policy at my law firm, so it's and it's interesting. The cannabis issue shows up a lot in my life because I'm representing people who have been completely screwed by large insurance companies. Mm-hmm. And most of the cases I work on involve these giant community managed associations. We just finished a case where I represented 240 families against one insurance company. And it was interesting. I would show up at board meetings. As I would be leaving the meeting, I'd always get someone who would walk up to me and go, "Hey, hold on a second. Hey, man, I found your blog." Like it was a big secret. And I said, it's not supposed to be a secret. That's the point of having a blog. Right. So News Munchies is going to be found if you look for my law firm. And I never mind that.
What's your law firm's name? I don't mean...
it's a boring law name.
Okay.
Corless Barfield Trial Group.
Sounds very legal.
It does. But here's how a lot of people find me. The kinds of cases I handle involve giant sinkholes that take out big buildings.
Oh, sure. Popular thing that happens in Florida.
Happens all the time. I mean, I just met with a family that had a 36-foot wide, 40-foot hole in their front yard that had eaten their Isuzu Trooper.
Wow.
And it was underneath the building, and the insurance company argued that it really wasn't affecting the house. And so I've spent so much time. I tried my very first sinkhole case about 15 years ago, and there's enough online. If you type Ted Sinkhole, see what happens.
Oh, nickname. Oh, Ted Sinkhole. Is that what they call you around the courthouse? Oh, well, Sinkhole Ted.
I do a radio show in Tampa sometimes, and they call me Teddy Sinkhole.
Teddy Sinkhole.
That came out of that, yeah. So if you type Teddy Sinkhole, you'll find me, and you'll hopefully find News Munchies. So, yeah.
So, Ted, you didn't just come into cannabis recently. You've been interested in your cannabis your whole life.
I have.
How'd you get started with it?
I had an older brother who was a cannabis consumer, and much to the chagrin of my parents.
Thank gosh for those older brothers.
Oh, yes, that's right. Although when I started smoking, he would usually go and pinch my bag all the time. Can I say pinch my bag?
Goddamn older brothers.
Yeah. But can I say pinch my bag on this radio show?
Yeah, you can. You can. Is bag the appropriate term? Sack, maybe.
Sack.
Pinch my sack.
Pinch my sack.
Pinch my sack.
Right. He would pinch my sack all the time. And I'd say, hey, and because the reality was, what was I going to do? Run to mom and go, hey, my brother's pinching my bag, pinching my sack. All right. So this is going on. And I was a younger kid, but my brother got caught.
Pinching your sack?
He got pinched. Well, this was before I had a sack to pinch. He was pinching his own. And my father found his weed.
Okay.
Well, at that moment, I had this moment of clarity about the significance of cannabis because I literally thought that my father, like the back of his head was going to blow off. And I mean, my family liked to party, liked to drink. I'm from a big Italian family. We had these massive parties that would last 3 days. I could drink. My parents let me drink freely from about 6th grade on, and they didn't care. But man, if you got anywhere near marijuana, it was a disaster. Well, kind of jump 5 years later, my father still punished my brother profusely, just absolutely abused him over this. So one day, again, I'm Italian, so we went to a wedding because that's all Italian people do is go to weddings on the weekends. And so I go to my father's car one day to find, I don't know what the hell I was looking for. Well, what did I find under my father's seat? But I found his bag.
So did you pinch his sack?
I did later. I would do that. I remember one time I would find my father's paraphernalia, like he'd have a pipe, and then I would steal it, knowing that he would blame my brother. I would get back to him on
triangle.
That.
Perfect.
Right. It came right back around. And the funniest thing was I remember one time I pulled a pipe out in front of my brother because we came to, grips about it. And he looks at me and he goes, where the hell did you get that? And I go, I stole it from Dad. And he goes, that's mine. And that's kind of the way it went. So now fast forward, I'm 22 years old. I'm in college at the University of Missouri in Columbia. And
you're not stealing sacks anymore or pinching sacks anymore.
I'm paying for my sacks now. And somehow I ended up moderating a debate when I was 22 between the president of Missouri's normal chapter that was located in Columbia and 2 DEA agents. And you may remember from the 80s, Phil Donahue.
Yeah, sure.
So I got to play Phil Donahue, and about 1,000 people showed up for this thing, and I absolutely loved it. So I've just been fascinated not only from how much I love to consume it, but also the political, scientific, and cultural issues associated with it.
So what year was this? You saying late 80s, 90s?
This would have been in 1988.
1988. Yeah. So people weren't talking about cannabis like that then.
Not
it
at
was
all.
a height of just say no, height of the drug war, height of the drug war.
It was. And there was, and trust me, there was a drug war going on in urban centers. Mm-hmm. All the cocaine that the CIA was selling into L.A. or
it really
York,
just started
Chicago.
taking momentum throughout the country then, man.
Right. I write a lot about how incredibly jacked up the laws associated with all of those drugs were over years, and how you can trace so much of the negative social consequences of drug policy back to the people who wrote the laws. I mean, they created the opioid epidemic. I mean, and in a lot of ways, they created the crack epidemic in the 80s.
3 strikes, you're out. The judging crack like it was 10 times the weight of cocaine.
Right.
Always putting people of color, they would get charged with crack. White people would get charged with cocaine.
Right.
It was a really dark time. It really was.
Whenever I talk to people, or if I do a show or something, people will call in and ask, what's the best way that I can avoid being arrested with marijuana? My answer is simple: be white. You've got 4 times more likely to be arrested if you're a person of color. And even though white people consume cannabis almost 4 times as much as people of color do.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that's something that, I always felt these last several years that I've been given an opportunity to, be in an ultra conservative world as a lawyer representing large companies. And I think I have a kind of an obligation, if I can, to satisfy eliminating the stigma associated with marijuana. And I see it there not only in terms of the medical values, that's one thing, but for me, it's all about the civil liberties of it, meaning that I believe in limited government. I believe in individual choice. I believe I'm putting myself in a situation where if I can sit down with lawmakers and I can talk to them and pitch them, I think I've got an opportunity to move the dial.
Talking about it is the first step, that's for sure. Bring it out openly is the first step. That's one of the things that we do here on this podcast is we talk about all things cannabis and really in depth and at such a high level. Most people don't get to hear.
Right.
You're in Florida, though. Florida is still considered one of those rough conservative states. Like, is it normalizing? Are you still getting the backlash there? Is there people still fighting cannabis there?
The lawmakers have been overtly hostile to it. If you look at the original bill that was passed, 1357, it banned smoking, vaping, and eating cannabis.
Right. And only had a handful of conditions that you could get it for.
It really was. And,
right.
and the conditions were even narrow.
Mm-hmm.
Example, cancer was listed, but careful, because you don't get it to treat cancer. Most people get it to treat the effects of chemotherapy. Well, if that's what you're doing, that's not listed. The consuming of the product has to attempt to resolve the underlying disease.
Just more smoke and mirrors.
Absolutely.
Right.
There's a couple, an older lady who has had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, now for, I think, just short of 20 years. And she speaks regularly all over Florida. And every time she appears, I think she is really giving them that side of it, and eliminating a lot of the stigma. But conversely, I was invited to a consortium from the USF, University of South Florida. They had the dean of this is where I really started noticing that people are really starting to step back from the stigma. The dean of the Arts and Science College moderated this kind of consortium of people. There was 30 of us there, 27 doctors from the USF School of Medicine, and 3 lawyers. The first person to speak in the first 4 or 5 minutes referred to cannabis as dope. And after he said it a couple of times, I raised my hand. I said, you need to take personal responsibility for the stigma you're associating with it by speaking of it in a pejorative. So since we're here with doctors and scientists and lawyers, let's call it what it is. Let's call it cannabis or even marijuana and see how that goes. And this was an older lawyer, and I don't think he liked that. I'm not a young lawyer, but I'm a little bit younger than he was. He has more grandchildren than I do, is what I'd probably say. I don't have any. He came up to me afterwards and shook my hand and said, you know what? You got me. All right. So it was okay.
Yeah.
So I stick my head in there a little bit, see what I can do.
Now, that word right there, I have helped people understand the political situation with cannabis with that exact conversation of, hey, it's not marijuana. It's not dope. It's cannabis. Well, why don't you call it marijuana? And then you get to have these conversations of, well, marijuana was developed as a racist term. And if we continue using that, we're going to just have these racist, stigmatisms of what people think cannabis is,
right.
And that conversation right there is the best conversation to have with people,
right.
To explain to them that it's a plant, because this is the time when people get to understand what it is. If they don't know cannabis at all, people think it's a drug like heroin or pills.
Right.
And then you get
Schedule 1.
You get to tell them, no, it's a flower. It's a plant. It's of the genus cannabis, and it's just this great icebreaker conversation you get to have.
But you know what? The thing that is so bizarre about Floridian lawmakers,
I love that term, Floridians.
Floridian, yes, is there is only one political party in the entire state of Florida. I mean, the Republicans control both houses of the legislature and the governor's office and have for some time. They get into the details where they will have conversations on a real technical level, but all the information they're getting from moneyed interests that have every motivation to keep cannabis under wraps. Most of that being the alcohol industry in the state of Florida. I mean, we're the state, we want you to come down to Disney and buy $16 margaritas. That's what we want you to do. When you're not doing that, the guy who owns the building, who's getting 3% of the $16 margarita, isn't real happy about that. And so you see a lot of people trying to wrap themselves in the flag or wrap themselves in some purported moral authority over you to consume cannabis. And I think that is starting to recede. I think people understand, even if they don't want to consume it, they don't think people should go to jail for consuming a plant.
Right. Do you think that the image of who consumes cannabis is changing to the Floridians? Is this not just so much the dirty hippies anymore? Or do they still have that viewpoint?
A lot of people come to me as someone who's in a public space pretty regularly, and they ask me, are you at all concerned that people are going to stigmatize you because you consume cannabis? Does that affect your business at all? And it hasn't. I think it's actually enamored me to other people, that have come up to me and said, yeah, I'm a regular consumer or whatever. Or
it would hurt my business if I said I wasn't consuming cannabis.
That's true. You have to. Yeah.
Mandatory.
You can, although I'm not, for those members of the National Security Administration who may be listening to this podcast, I have all of the receipts. Anytime I ever purchase cannabis in Denver, I always take my receipts back and submit them because I write about it in the blog. So I argue that, hey, I get a tax break. So I get to write my weed off.
No, I'd agree with you.
And by the way, I don't even like the word weed. I don't know where that's a word. It's a bad word. I don't use that word. It's not a weed. Weeds grow wildly. They don't. And
it is a highly cultivated herb. That's for sure. Yeah, I do prefer like the Rasta tradition of herb and ganja. I like those terms.
Yeah.
Cannabis is a mouthful. You got to take it however you can get it, I suppose.
I have a 9-year-old, and so my 9-year-old calls it cannabis. And of course, her only association with it is she knows that Daddy's writes about it, and
Daddy's on the cannabis.
But as a lawyer, I have no interest in. I get phone calls from people who want me to represent them in cannabis issues on a legal sense, but I don't really want to do that. That's not really where my heart is. It's an administrative law question. I mean, how exciting could that be? I think my time is better spent out meeting with people. I just gave a lecture to 35 judges, and it was a little awkward to be talking about illegal drug use in front of judges that I'm in front of as a lawyer. That was I will say this, for an hour and a half, nobody said a word. And then at the very end, and there were a few questions, a guy stood up and started talking about Marinol because his husband had died from AIDS-related problems. And he talked about how much cannabis had really given comfort to him, but that when they attempted to use Marinol, it was just a miserable, horrible experience. And that's what I hear from most people. They say it's like over medicating with edibles.
Absolutely.
That's what it feels like.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Even though we hear in the news that Florida is legalizing medical cannabis, there's still a fight there. There's still the forces of evil trying to keep the good cannabis out of the people who need it.
And I really don't see, in terms of predicting the next 36 months or so in Florida, I don't think you're going to see a lot of big movement. I think they could screw around with a new bill for better. Obviously, nothing's going to happen this year. And the last bill that was passed, if you looked at the bill, they got over 20 different bills submitted for legalization following the passage of Amendment 2, the constitutional amendment to legalize medical marijuana. And the bill they ended up passing was written by a guy who went to a Christian law school in Northeast Georgia. I don't remember the name of it. And it was out of Lee County, which is, again, one of the most conservative counties in all of the state of Florida. And that's what's so crazy about it, is the idea that there's so many of us that are out talking about cannabis. There's one particular lawyer who is very, very wealthy. He's started out kind of as the skeezy slip and fall lawyer, but his name's John Morgan, and he's kind of become the firebrand for legalization. It's too bad that it's associated with John. John's a good guy. I'm not saying he's not, but he has all the stigma associated with being a plaintiff's lawyer, which is a separate issue you have to deal with as they have a certain opinion of people that do that kind of work.
So today in Florida, there's limited dispensaries and limited grows. Can you give us the framework?
Sure. We're essentially a concentrate only state. That's the easiest way to say it. because that's the only way it can be consumed. When they originally passed the requirements for who could submit an application, they built in a lot of things to discourage people from doing it. If I want to start a dispensary in the state, I have to submit an application with a $15,000 application fee. And it could take 2 years before they would even really in earnest examine the application. And they were doing a lot of things that I heard they were doing in Massachusetts, where they'll require you, before you can get licensed, you have to build your location. Mm-hmm. You have to have it ready, up and running, but that doesn't mean you're going to start selling anytime soon. So you're paying all your overhead. And so what it's done is it's given people like Governor Rick Scott an opportunity to get a lot of his political cronies into the industry. They passed a law that said you can't grow it unless you've been in the agriculture business for no less than 30 years. And we found out that one of the winners of getting a permit had been in the business for 31 years, and he had been a major contributor to Rick Scott's gubernatorial campaign.
That just epitomized the good old boy legal system that the South is so famous for.
Oh, yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, it's bad.
Right.
I'm originally from Missouri, and Missouri's got its own political problems. Obviously, the governor of Missouri just resigned. But in the state of Florida, the cronyism is overwhelming. And you've got some really nice people who are running for those positions in the legislature with virtually no background in anything. I recently met a gentleman who's running for Florida House whose work history involves 3 years at McDonald's. And he's being supported by the Republican Party. Or you have, again, Richard Corcoran, who is timed out in Florida, who's the Speaker of the House. And the gentleman who is picking up his seat happens to be his pastor. And you have Richard Corcoran, in the hour I got to spend with him, mentioned to me on 3 occasions his meetings with the Koch brothers. And so we see a lot of the Koch brothers in the laws in the state of Florida.
There's still to this day just a handful of producers.
That's right. Even getting a card is very difficult because of the limited nature of it.
There are dispensaries, though.
There are. In the Tampa Bay area, I think there are half a dozen.
Right. Half a dozen dispensaries.
Right.
You have to talk your physician into giving you a recommendation for cannabis.
If your physician got permission and went to the course and took the...
So your physician has to have a course to certify him that he's... Wow. So.
Which, in fact, and what again, a good example of the lawmakers are making those decisions because they're the ones that came up with what are the requirements for a doctor to be able to do this. Now, my doctor happens to be, he went through the process, and I have a medical card. But again, you got to be real careful, and I'm not going to say too much more about that. If the doctor writes a script for you and there isn't a good basis for him to give that to you or her to give that to you, that's a misdemeanor.
Wow. So this totally blows me away because of all the pain clinics in Florida. Right? Like, how can this exist? You know, that like you can bus loads of people come down to Florida every day and walk into a pain clinic where a doctor there prescribes them whatever oxy, whatever, and they get back on the bus and they go back to Virginia and Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama and New York and sell drugs and do heavy opiates. But you can't.
But you can't, blows me away. I know, and I mean, because
it blows me away.
So I was curious, if you can't smoke it, eat it, or vape it, the only thing we could come up with were suppositories. Or I
love my ganja suppositories.
That's right. And then
whole leaf.
Yeah, right. I mean, the opioid problem in Florida is something that when I was representing big insurance companies for 10 years, I had a pretty big crew of people working for me. So we would get a lot of unusual problems coming in. And we regularly had people coming in who had family members who had overdosed on opioids. And they wanted to know what they could do about it. But there really isn't anything you can do. You can't sue the pain management clinic. there's really nothing. There's nothing there.
Right, because in Florida, part of their thing is that you don't have to have insurance to operate in Florida as a doctor.
Right. Or most of them.
Malpractice insurance.
Right. The malpractice insurance most of them buy, if they buy it at all, is for $250,000.
Right.
Which, you know, if you get a lawyer involved, $250,000 is going to eat 40% of it, the cost and everything else. But a bigger problem is the way they wrote the wrongful death statute. Let me give you an illustration. A family came to me. Their daughter had overdosed on a litany of drugs. We found out she was taking 17 different prescriptions every single day, some of them multiple. And the pain management clinic was giving her 1,000 oxys a month, and she got about an equal number of benzos. And she was taking methadone, which you're not supposed to take methadone with any benzo because it turns you into a zombie. And when she overdosed, she'd gotten addicted to opioids because of an auto accident where she injured her neck. When she came in, the only thing we told the mother that she could recover on behalf of her daughter was the $1,200 she paid to have her cremated. Those were the only damages that she could get. She couldn't get any non-economic damages. And if her motivation was to punish this doctor, that wasn't going to happen. And they just walked away. But in 2012, at the height of the pain management clinic problem, there were more than 1,500 overdoses on opioids in the state of Florida. Now, one of the reasons that was happening is because the pain management clinics would allow a doctor to write you a 12-month script. And people would go to a pharmacy next door to the pain management clinic, and they would get all 1,000 hits of opioids. Well, then they would go back to the pain management clinic. They would give half of the drugs back to the clinic, and then the clinic would sell them out the back. So you got your drugs for free because you gave the 500 back, and then they would sell them illegally out the back door.
It's just really disgusting. Florida is one of the biggest problems with our opioid epidemic. The government in Florida and the businesses in Florida, they need to recognize what's going on. That's for sure. They are causing a huge problem.
Well, I've personally lost 3 first-degree relatives from opioid overdoses. And just 2 weeks ago, one of my fraternity brothers overdosed on oxys. And it's just amazing because everybody in Florida, because it's such a problem, has that connection to it. You're 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from people who are having a problem with opioids. That's why I see that the opioid issue is so intertwined with the cannabis issue.
It is.
Yeah, it really is.
It bites it. Well, man, that's some depressing shit. Let's move on and talk about something else. Hey, you know, what's exciting? Let's talk about something exciting in cannabis.
I'm excited about Canada.
Canada, me too.
I am going to Montreal.
Yeah.
Listen,
it's today. Yesterday they legalized cannabis, yes. June 19th.
Right. Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
And literally they freed the slaves.
They freed the slaves. Oh,
yeah.
I'm free. I'm free.
That's exciting. You got to find the good. You got to.
So in Canada, they federally legalized cannabis throughout the whole country. What's that going to mean?
I think that may ultimately be the tipping point for a liberalization of the laws in our country. I
agree.
I hope so.
I agree.
Because I just, right now, we're planning a trip to Uruguay.
Oh, great. Yeah. Great. Yeah, they've got some interesting stuff going on down there, too.
So let me tell you my Obama story. So I had
Obama Kush?
No, do you have some?
Yeah, we'll talk later.
I mean, you can't cross everything with OG Kush, man. I mean, I try and explain that to people. I'm like, my God, not everything Kush. But hey, I love my OG Kush. But so I ran into this guy at this meeting who was an undersecretary. He had just left the White House when Obama was there, and he had spent time with Obama as an undersecretary of state in South America. And he was at a meeting right after Uruguay was talking about legalizing it. The significance of Canada is that they're the first G8 country, the big countries to legalize it. But Uruguay was technically the very first country to do so. But he told me that they were at a meeting and Obama kind of leaned into him and said, "See me later about this marijuana thing." And so,
wait a second. That sounds like something.
Yeah. So he said that.
They can't meet me behind me.
You got any of that South American Kush? Yeah.
But I got some Hawaiian.
So he looked at him later and he goes, he said Obama just kind of leaned into him later, and he goes, "Shit," he goes, "The United States got the best weed, man. I'm not smoking any of that Paraguay and Uruguay marijuana." And I loved the fact that Obama made the comment, did I inhale? Oh, well, hell yeah. That was the point. That was the point. I'm long on the Canadians, man. I think it's going to be a really positive thing.
I'm sure you're familiar with the BC bud that flooded the U.S. in the late 80s, early 90s. BC bud was prevalent pre-2001. Really, as soon as 9/11 happened, all the import restrictions started, and, cannabis did not flow freely from the north any longer.
Have you ever heard of something called the Silk Road?
The Silk Road, yes. Well,
I spent my allowance several times over on the Silk Road, and when Silk Road was up and running, I bought Bitcoins for about $6. And the way you would have to go about getting the money in the hands of Silk Road and then making your purchases, I don't know if you participated in that, but we certainly did. And
no, not at all.
Not at all, no. We were getting plants got a lot of plants out of Canada, and we got a lot of plants out of Amsterdam, a lot. Although I've been to Amsterdam, and I will take the Pepsi challenge on that Amsterdam shit and tell you, Amsterdam cannabis sucks. I mean, horrible. The hash is half cumin. So when you smoke it, you're like, is somebody cooking chili in there? What are you doing? It's horrible.
I was just in Amsterdam, and I spent a ton of time collectively, probably years there between 99 and 2010. And we would always bring our own weed. Right. And people,
it's like taking sand to the beach.
Yeah. People would laugh at me, and then they'd hit it one time and tell me it was too strong. Right. When I was back this past time, though, and I got good direction, I got some decent connections there. Right. You can imagine that over the time I've cultivated some of the better cannabis producers in the world as my friends. And wow, man. Just the random ganja shop had pretty decent weed this time.
I'm glad to hear that.
It is. It's getting better.
I was there about 3 years ago, so that's not a little while. Yeah.
There's places that have all the U.S. strains. There's U.S. growers there now, and that's been building for 15 years. But the interesting thing is they actually had import California cannabis.
That's funny.
And it was €35. 35
wow.
euro a gram.
A gram?
A gram.
Oh,
35 euro a gram. I almost bought some, but I am a little too cheap. So,
oh wow, you got to look at the tax opportunities, though. You got to write that stuff off.
Amsterdam's been able to do something really interesting that the U.S. is going to have problems with, and Canada's having problems with right now, is keeping the end price high and keeping the economy high.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I think it needs to be like obtainable when people want to go and buy a sack of weed, but we got to have a good economy of it all. Right. So still to this day, you can pay 35 euro a gram, 17 euro a gram, 12 euro a gram, right, for high end cannabis over there. And people here in Colorado are fighting for the bottom of the barrel at $3 and $4 and $5.
Wow.
And, unfortunately, I don't think that low priced cannabis is going to promote high quality product.
I agree.
Right.
Well, right. Because so much of the cost is post cultivation.
Absolutely.
And
Harvest, curing, packaging.
Right.
That's all what makes good cannabis great, is that right there. But I was pleased to find that we got some great weed there. And, Amsterdam's, they've always pioneered, and the Netherlands have always pioneered those long season strains because they get paid more. If it's a 20-week strain, they get paid more for it. Where in the U.S., it doesn't matter if it's 6 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 15 weeks. It's all this like kind of random gauge of, supply and demand economics.
Right.
I do see some beautiful things that have happened in Amsterdam.
Good.
Is this push for higher quality product and higher end product?
I think people will, if it's higher end, people will pay for it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that because I can't get quality product legally in the state of Florida. When I come to Denver, I'm not looking for bargains.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's plenty of bargains here too.
There really are. And there's some, I noticed a couple of the bigger dispensaries are they're offering some lower, some more affordable stuff. And I think that's terrific. That's great. But I want to see those. I usually walk in dispensaries and ask the same question. I look at the bud tender and go, what do you smoke? And they'll always go, they never blink. They don't go, well, I don't know. They just immediately, oh yeah, right over here. Hold on a second. Let me get this down here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay, got it right here. What are you doing right there? Although, where the hell was I? I was in Vegas. Mm-hmm. And they were selling a plant there. They called it Nightmare Cookies for $800 an ounce.
Wow.
Okay. So I thought,
Good
you know
for
what?
Them.
I'm going to give me a quarter of that. I'm going to try that. It was okay. Was it worth $800? No. No. But listen, I want to support that because, I'm like, if I go in a restaurant and there's nothing I really want to eat on the dessert menu, I'm not going to just order anything. I'm not, you get older, you got to worry about those calories. But when it comes to cannabis, I want the quality stuff.
Well, there you go. If you're a cannabis dealer out there, get in contact with Ted. He prefers the $12,000 pounds.
Listen, if you saw my order, if you could go back through my Silk Road order history, it was pretty funny. Yeah, and I loved how the stuff would arrive because everybody had this creative way that they would deliver it in the mail that you wouldn't know what was in it. My favorite was a guy. I ordered some, here I am. I'm going right in here. Some opium, some raw opium from this guy in India. The way he delivered it was he sent me a framed picture. And that was just a framed picture. And there was just a picture with frame and no instructions. So I thought, all right, we'll see what we got. So I pulled the picture back and he had ironed out this 2 grams of raw opium and wrapped it in cellophane and then put it underneath the picture in between the frame. So that was fun stuff. But obviously we know now that Dred Scott Roberts he got like 2,000 years. My thing about the future is I'm not quite so positive as a lot of people are. I don't believe in the tipping point. We've got a certain number of states that are recreational. We have a certain number that are medical. I'm not one that believes that the lawmakers are necessarily going to wise up to the economic benefits. And it's more about the fact that there are so many economic benefits of keeping it down because they already know, you got big alcohol, you got big pharma, you've got a lot of other interests associated with keeping it illegal and keeping it criminal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those people are still in power. Example, one lawmaker I met who was actively fighting against cannabis in any form also happened to his biggest contributor was the guy who owned one of the largest alcohol distribution networks in the Panhandle. Mm-hmm. And there's alcohol knows that it loses when it goes head to head against cannabis. It's going to give up a substantial piece of it. And, we talk about by 2030, we're hoping that cannabis sales are $30 billion. I think we'll hit those numbers. But last year, we sold $220 billion worth of beer, wine, and spirits. So they've got a lot of money to spend and a lot of ways to trip it up.
Yeah, they're rooted too.
Right. But where the positive part is that I think as the stigma goes down, you're going to see more civil disobedience. You're going to just see people like me standing outside the mayor's office in St. Pete smoking a joint deliberately. And it's just, although what is the deal? I know at Red Rocks you can smoke, but I think it's hilarious that they have, right? They've got the big monitor up. Okay. Right. And the monitor, the consumption of marijuana should not be in the public. Right, and you're sitting there, okay.
Yeah, text 5555555 if your neighbor is bothering you with his marijuana smoke.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Well, now they push you out to the sides. Okay. So you can't, so in the smoking area, they push you over to the sides,
but they'll allow you to consume.
Yeah. Okay. I've attended Red Rocks before and been handed a card because it's loud. So they hand you a card that says, cannabis smoking is not permitted here, and if we catch you again, we'll eject you. Please go to the smoking area.
Okay. We went to Dirty Heads last year at Red Rocks and just had a fantastic time. My wife and I did, and
great venue, man. Couldn't beat that venue.
Absolutely
right?
the best.
Right. Denver is the number one music city right now. There's so much great music here. Yeah. There are so many great music venues. But look, Red Rocks, if you haven't been to Red Rocks, man, go see anybody.
Right.
And
poetry reading.
Yeah, I used to joke. You can go see Dolly Parton. It'll be the best show you've ever seen.
Right.
Well, I saw Dolly Parton last year, and goddamn, it was the best show I think I've ever seen in Red Rocks.
Wow.
She was awesome. I'm not like a Dolly fan, but my wife and all of her family from Tennessee are. So that pretty much makes me a Dolly fan too.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was a great show. Red Rocks, an awesome spot. And we smoked in the smoking section on the side.
Good for you. Well, right. I mentioned that because you go to a concert in the state of Florida, I just stopped.
Mm-hmm.
If you try and smoke in the venue, what we usually do is we roll these half joints,
mm-hmm.
and you just go in the stall, shut the door, smoke, finish it, throw it in, walk. And so they're, what's that smell over there? I can't figure that out. But if you try and smoke in the venue, there is nowhere in Tampa where they will not come over to you and kick you out.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately that is a problem with the future in the current place we live in is rock and roll used to be where you would go to the show and you could smoke a joint publicly. That was the public weed smoking spot.
Yeah.
Right. And they tolerated it. As soon as the lights went down, everybody fired up. Right. But now with the anti-smoking, laws that they have, cannabis smoke is criminalized under those laws, unfortunately.
Right.
And that's a really sad thing, man.
You talk about the future. I think Denver is going to lead the future on having public access. And I mean,
it's coming. Yeah.
And it's either going to be here or it's going to be Vegas.
Yeah. It's happening here. It's happening in California and it's happening in Vegas.
Yeah.
I'm really surprised at how there's so much talk about it in California. The way that the people talk about it is like, oh, well, you need some place to smoke. And it's so logical to think about it that way. Oh, well, you can't smoke out on the streets.
You can't smoke in your rental car.
You can't smoke in your rental car. You can't smoke in your hotel room. You need some place to smoke. Right. In Las Vegas, of course, they're going to allow that. They're the entertainment capital of the world.
But I was at the Wynn about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And what I do when I'm traveling is I'll go outside and I'll find the designated smoking area for tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did that at the Wynn, and they came for me. They're like, they were over there, man. I mean, I was like, hey, you.
Yes, hey, you.
Oh, my name? What? You want my name? Why, dude? What are you doing? I'm just here in the smoking area enjoying
this. This is medical cannabis for me here.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a card. And in terms of the future too, something I'd like to see would be more reciprocity with, if I have a medical card in Florida.
Absolutely.
I want to be able to walk in and not necessarily get taxed as much, or I want to be able to get access to products that I may not otherwise be able to. I'd like to see that. But as someone coming from Florida, I think we're going to keep fighting. I think that we see a lot of turnover with, I'm very hopeful about an attorney general candidate who's the Democratic candidate, Sean Shaw. I'm very excited about Sean being attorney general. Smart guy. And I think he'd bring some sense to that topic, because right now what we have is Pam Bondi, who is a Trump stooge.
Pam.
Yeah. People named Pam. You're named after a cooking spray, for God's sake.
Right. No offense, Pam. My good friend Pam. We love you. Everybody else but you.
All the other Pams.
All the other Pams but you.
Yeah.
Right. People believe that cannabis is legal throughout the country now. People believe that medical cannabis is something that's freely, readily available in so many states. And it's just not. There's this farce that's going on. And really, I think it's really detrimental in places like Georgia and Florida, where they pass these Jesus-type laws where the legislator says, oh, well, we passed medical cannabis, just like you were saying earlier.
It sucks, and what happens is it sucks all the wind out of it.
It does.
Takes the wind out of the sails because they're like, well, we already solved
did that.
problem.
Wait a second. You know, it's like, no, you didn't actually. Your legislation just, the governor just passed a law, pushed a law that had medical cannabis in it, in the framing, but it didn't do anything for anybody. It didn't allow more access. It didn't decrease more people to go into jail. Right. It didn't stop law enforcement. And
on that issue about law enforcement, we have the strangest situation in Tampa because you have the city has decriminalized, but the county did not.
Okay.
If you get pulled over by a city cop and you have cannabis, it's a $75 fine.
Okay.
And it's a civil fine. So if you get pulled over 10 times, it's 75, 75, 75, just keeps going.
Perfect place.
So it doesn't accelerate. But if a sheriff's deputy pulls you over for any reason and you have it, it's $300. And the second time it gets worse and you go right back into the criminalization issue. And so we're hopeful that, again, those are the kinds of things I think that everybody's going to continue to build on, because you cannot put people in jail for smoking a plant. You can't do it. And if you spend any time in a Floridian jail, you really, really don't want to be in there for that.
Yeah, it's not a good, not that I've ever spent any time, but I can just imagine in hot, humid Georgia, humid Florida, it's not comfortable.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. I've had to visit a few folks in jail, and it's not a pleasant place to be. A lot of violence and going in for something as silly as that. Although the biggest problem we really have in Florida is they continue to use a lot of the marijuana convictions as aggravating issues to make your next crime even worse.
Absolutely. Escalated.
Yeah, that's right. That day, oh, wait a minute. He was doing that, but didn't he have another charge? Now all of a sudden you got a client who's got to plead out.
Right.
And they're going to spend some time in jail.
Absolutely.
I don't do that kind of stuff because I just can't. I can't do it.
Yeah, no, it's a hard place to be. And you know, I work between here in California often, and in California, you still have this enforcement, cops and robbers mentality. And here in Colorado, it's a compliance, not enforcement.
Okay.
Right. And so, you know, when the regulatory authorities come in California, it's enforcement. They're enforcing this. They're enforcing it. And it's clearly different here in Colorado. It's like, oh, we need to get you into compliance.
When I first started traveling to Colorado to explore the cannabis, I was here the first 420 cannabis cup after recreational was legalized.
Yeah, the High Times Cup. I remember that one. It was a great one. Oh, yeah.
25,000 people showed up to this thing.
Cell phone service just dropped out. Right.
Well, and I remember it was 4 hours
to get in. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we're standing there, and I'm interviewing some people. I got a mic out. I'm talking to people, and all of a sudden, an Apache helicopter flies over us. Just cleared the trees, and I hear somebody say, "Oh, it's the police." I'm like, hey, genius, the police don't have Apache helicopters. That's the feds. And, but you have the perspective. You were there. You imagine. So we're there. I didn't even see two people shove each other. 4 hours to get in. And there were people, they were throwing joints over the side, and they had these big burlap sacks, and they reach in and throw them. And I always tell people,
tossing.
Right, and one of the women was topless, so topless doobie tossing. I mean, it was a great way to spend an afternoon. But you think about, right, if there was a tequila festival and 25,000 people showed up, they would have been ripping people off of each other. There would have been violence, and that particular Cannabis Cup was 5 times bigger than the one the year before. I had no idea that many people were going to show up. But I didn't even see a cop other than the Apache helicopter.
Right. You know, interesting thing about that Cannabis Cup is dabbing was really starting to take hold right then. And I saw numerous people getting carted out and hitting the ground and taking dabs and falling out. Because you could, at the time, they were still allowing people to like serve people cannabis at this festival. Now they can't do that, right?
Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, now they can. Now you can't do it. Now there's no, dispensaries can't give away cannabis anymore here.
Okay.
So I asked one of the paramedics, I'm like, hey, man, what do you think about all this? You know? And he was like, oh, this is nothing, man. This is way better than a bunch of drunks.
Sure.
Right. You know, it's like nobody's puking on me. Right. You know, I'm just picking some people up that fell down on the ground.
Well, they probably arrest more people at a Broncos game for just being stupid drunk at that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
But see, those things have to expand. You know, I mean, they have to. People in Florida need to see that. Mm-hmm. They need to understand that this isn't going to turn people into, you know, a bunch of drunken idiots.
Right.
Or that smoking cannabis does not lead you to opioids. They don't. We're going to be talking here in a couple of weeks to a doctor who's using cannabis to treat opioid addiction. And because I'm such a huge proponent of that.
Yeah, I've seen it successful several times.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm excited about those kinds of things.
Yeah. You know, California has said in their regulations where you can have events. So you can host events and they be licensed events where people can openly consume cannabis and you can buy and sell cannabis.
Got it.
Right. And that's all just coming into play there. Like, you know, they've just allowed the first one or two of these events to happen. So, you know, we're going to see some cool things happen with those type of events now, because in the past it's just been bootleg. And the Emerald Cup and the Chalice Cup, those are two examples of cannabis festivals where you could openly buy and sell cannabis in all of its forms.
What was that? I was at a cup in Sonoma, and they would allow you, if you could get into the medical part.
This is the Emerald Cup.
Is that
it was Emerald Cup. Okay. Yeah, at the fairgrounds, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah, totally.
And what you had to have a band, which means you had to have a card.
Yep.
Well, all I did was we showed up about 3:00, and there was just a whole bunch of people just stoned out of their minds, standing outside, sitting down on the curb or whatever. So I pulled a $100 bill out and I walked up to this guy and I go, "You done with that wristband?" And the guy looks at me and goes, "Hey, buddy, I smell bacon." And I realized I totally look like a narc. Who's this? Because I think I had like a tie on, you know.
Yeah,
like, hey.
right.
And so then the other guy's like, I don't care. So he slides it off and gives it to me, and then I go in. So what they were doing was you could make a donation to the charity.
You're right.
And for every $10 that you donated, they give you a gram. So I ended up going back. Oh, this is a fun.
You were one of the biggest donators all day long.
I was very charitable.
Yeah, very charitable.
So I leave with this shopping bag of plants. So we go back and we got a bunch of people at our hotel, and so then a couple days later we all go home. So when I get home, there's a phone message on my voicemail at the office, and it's a sheriff's deputy, and I say, "This is Mr. Corless. This is Sergeant Schmedlap calling in. I'm calling you from the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office." And I'm thinking, oh, God, what am I going to be banned to go back to California? No. He wanted to make sure I knew that he received a phone call from the hotel, and they said they found some medical marijuana in the room. And if I wanted to come down to the station and pick it up, they'd keep it there till Friday.
But Friday at about 4:19, it's going to be gone. We got to get rid of it.
We got to burn it up.
We're going to have to burn it and burn up the evidence.
And I told my wife, I said, "Yeah, we've passed into a new world. The cops are calling me, trying to send me my plants back."
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, Ted, it's been a great conversation today. I really appreciate you joining me.
I've enjoyed it.
I'm sure there's going to be lots of stuff to talk about in the future. I'm going to use you as an expert smoke witness anytime someone wants to debunk the science of smoking.
Send them my way.
I am absolutely going to do that. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode of The Real Dirt, please download this and others at therealdirt.com or on iTunes, The Real Dirt Podcast. Hey, and if our listeners want to listen to News Munchies, how do we get in touch with that, or how do we listen to that?
My blog is www.newsmunchies.com. We blog regularly. We also have a YouTube channel with videos that we've shot in our own studio in Tampa. All of it cannabis related, and then you'll also see some of the other stuff we do when we beat up those evil insurance companies.
Hey, thanks, Ted. I really appreciate you. And all you listeners out there, just fire another one up and binge another episode of The Real Dirt. Stay high. Thank you for joining me here on The Real Dirt. It was a great conversation with Ted. I didn't really know we were going to get into the science of smoke and what made tobacco smoke different from cannabis smoke and, really what was going on throughout Florida. Ted was a really interesting guy, and I'm so fortunate that I get to talk to so many industry experts and leaders throughout the country and the world. I learned so much through these moments that I have with them. And, I hope you get something out of it too. That's really why we're doing this. I think we're at episode like 36 or something like that we've released. We've recorded many, many more. We have many more to come. But I want you to understand that I am doing this solely because I want to bring out the good information on cannabis, on hemp, on medical marijuana. I'm not advertising anything for sale. I'm not promoting anything. I try not to have guests on here that are solely just selling their product. As I listen to other episodes of other podcasts, I hear this. This isn't an info commercial for you. And I hope it never comes off that way. We've had a few sponsors in the past, and we'll have more sponsors in the future. But I really want to keep this independent form of thought where our content isn't developed or motivated by any sort of resource gain. I truly want this information out there. I truly want to get better at delivering it to you. And I'm really interested in how you perceive this. If you could make a comment, tell me how you enjoyed this episode. If you could make a comment, tell me the things you're interested in hearing about. I'd be glad to investigate it. And their chances are, if you're interested in some portion of cannabis history or cannabis growth technology or cannabis politics or cannabis business, I'm interested in it too, and so are other people. So reach out, comment on our Facebook page, comment on our Instagram page, comment on our website, comment on our blog. And I'd really love to hear from you. So this has been The Real Dirt. Download this episode and others on therealdirt.com. Or if you want to go to our iTunes account, it's The Real Dirt Podcast. Subscribe there. Please subscribe there. We need all the subscribers we can get. Even if you just like to listen to the episodes, you really would support us if you subscribe us through iTunes, and we get as many subscribers through iTunes as possible. Thanks for enjoying this episode. Look out for this other episodes coming up on similar topics, the politics of cannabis. I'm a little fired up about it right now, so let's get into it. All right, stay high.